I'm here with knitwear designer and color expert Laura Bryant, who has literally written the book on mindful knitting with color. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, Uni. It's good to be here.
So, this is an amazing looking scarf. I mean, I love hand-dyed yarns and the wonderful color effects that you can get.
And this is exactly why people do love hand-dyed yarns, but there are a lot of tricks to knitting with hand-dyed yarn. Too often it can produce stripes that we don't like, or pooling, or all kinds of effects that aren't great. And so my book talks about all of the different kinds of hand-dyed yarns, and we're going to do that today.
Okay.
Starting with the three most common kinds of hand-dyed yarns. Here we have hand-painted yarns, and these literally are designed to not stripe and pattern and pool. And you can't always tell what a hand-dyed yarn is going to knit like when you see it in the skein, but these are particularly interesting in that when you see a skein that has all these little tiny bits of color in it,
Almost flecks of color.
Yes, that is a hand-painted yarn. It's not going to pool, it's not going to pattern, it's not going to stripe. And our two hats and the scarf are an example of that, as well as the two samples up here. And you can see that although there's some striping, there's not a regular striping.
And it's an overall kind of very modeled,
right,
rich
exactly.
effect.
And it's hard, again, it's hard to tell for sure, but when you look at a skein that's speckled like this, you know that's that. This is another hand-dyed skein, hand-painted skein, and although you see some longer runs of color, it's a little harder to tell if this one is that or not. The most common kind of hand dyeing that you'll see is dyed across. And these skeins literally have been placed on a flat surface and wetted, and then the dye is applied across the skein.
Oh, okay.
So you can see how the colors are lining up. We have unique colors at the two ends, and then colors that are lined up like this. Okay, this is a swatch from a dyed across skein, and where there are longer bits of color, you're getting longer stripes.
Okay.
Where there are smaller bits of color, you're getting smaller areas. So there's a little more play back and forth between long and short.
And there's sort of a regularness to the striping, or regularity to the striping.
Yes, there is. Okay.
So, I mean, how can you, I mean, obviously when you can, in the skein, you can see that sometimes.
If you're buying a skein that has not been reskeined, then you can tell easily.
What do you mean reskeined?
Reskeined. Well, this is a dye skein. This is how this particular yarn is dyed in this big 1 pound hank. Well, we're not going to resell it that way. So instead, we have reskeined it to a smaller size skein.
Okay.
When you see a skein like this, you have no idea, like this skein, how that's been dyed. When you see a skein like this, you do.
Which is sold the way it's dyed.
Right. So this one is what we call dyed around the skein. And you can see that there's a distinct one color, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Not across. And there's no way that you can align this
to make it match across.
But dyed across and dyed around skeins knit very similarly. Dyed around skeins, because they have longer stretches of color, are even more striping than dyed across skeins. But they both have the ability to do what we call repeats. And we're going to talk a whole lot about that in future episodes. But for right now, if you don't know what your skein is, because you have a skein like that, and now you're going to put it in a ball so that you can knit with it, you can actually reconstruct it simply by targeting colors. Now here what I've been looking for is where the blue turns to the pink. And I can...
Let's move this over so we can see it really clearly.
Align these colors.
Oh, so you're actually making up the skein that it was dyed in.
You're reconstructing the skein. So now I can look at this and say, oh, this is a dyed around skein. So I know that I've got this color, and this color. And that gives you information about the skein. A la, it's going to knit more like this than it is like that.
And it helps you to decide how you're going to work.
It does. If you have a skein like this, you can, this is how you know it's a hand-painted skein. Now I'm going to target this green here, and I'm going to follow through until I find that green again. Okay, so I've got the magenta to the green, and I'm going to do that another time, and I've got that magenta to the green there pretty well. But when I put this down on the table and I look at the rest of it,
Oh yeah, that
Look
becomes
here.
really
See,
clear.
all of a sudden there's some blue in there, there's some gray in there, there's some bright red down at the end, then there's some purple. This is a hand-painted skein. The color doesn't go fully through all of the threads. And that very much is what leads to this sort of look, which is more mottled, as opposed to this, which is very striped. Now, when these dye up, and every dyer makes their decisions based on what they want. The problems with this, with a hand painted, is that it's very labor intensive to get all of the white spots covered up. With dyed across, you have a problem getting, again, white spots underneath covered up. This is one of the issues that happens with dyed across or dyed around skeins when you have changing stitch counts. And the patterning, which is fairly random, all of a sudden does this real patterning thing. So there are tactics that we can use that we're going to talk about again in a future episode that explores different pattern stitches that you can use like this that break up the patterning that wants to happen. Also, hand-dyed yarns can go beautifully with sand-wash solids. Most dyers do sand-wash solids. So you can use, as in this vest or our tee here, you can use hand-dyed solids, which are semi-solid, with the hand-dyed yarns, and they have a beautiful look. They all have a one aesthetic that comes from one dyer, and that's really the beauty of it, celebrating that dyer.
That's the color artistry.
Yeah.
In a future episode, Laura will be telling us about the magic number, which will help you control your hand-dyed and hand-painted yarns. And if you'd like to try out a pattern for a hand-painted yarn yourself, the pattern for this cute hat is on the web. We'll be right back.